about 10 minutes of time. I've got a few questions to start us off, but if you start thinking, perhaps, anyone's got a burning question, if you perhaps want to stand up where you are and throw a question at either of our esteemed panel here.
I've got a question. How many FIEC churches are there in the Midlands or your patch?
In my patch,
Yes.
we've got in in my patch we have at the moment, discounting Bethel, we've got 3 in Coventry. There's Holbrooks, there's Dover Avenue. There's a lovely little mission place at Willen Hall. And then next week I'm going to Hinckley because there's a new church come on in Hinckley. And then there's my own church that I go to in Emmanuel in Leamington. But we're all part of what we call the West Midlands. And every so often, did you say how many in the West Midlands? I don't know. What happens is that the area visitors all get together about 3 or 4 times a year. And we meet up, usually in Birmingham, but we're just a part of that West Midlands area.
There's about 30 in that group.
Thank you. Thank you. You see, you need the expert alongside you.
Thank you.
It was very interesting, Richard, you talked about mission. I think if you had that conversation with Keith, you might actually say that's very, very close. As a church, Bethel, the Lord's really blessed us over the last couple of years, and we currently have a building project, which if the Lord continues to bless, will have outgrown by the time it's built. Which is a nice sort of scenario to have. So at the moment we're having a conversation as a church, we've had a couple of meetings about church growth and what does that look like. So if we were looking to perhaps either plant a church or revive perhaps an alien ministry in Coventry, how might the FIEC be able to support us in that?
That's a really good question, and I think it is good to differentiate between the two, planting new works and restoring more struggling works. And maybe I'll come back to that in a moment. But I think in terms of church planting, we can do a number of things. First of all, we need a pretty rigorous assessment of the kind of guys and girls that God is calling into this work. It's not an easy work to do, and I think it's kind of easy to say if you send folk to Bible college, that will prepare them for this, and the truth is that may be part of the preparation, but it isn't enough. And I think the area that we really have to work on is the area of character. I think that was kind of something that came out a lot last weekend. So I think first of all we can help with the assessing of the suitability for folk for ministry, for church planting particularly, which is pretty demanding and tough. I think there's a whole load of legal and practical stuff that we can help with. I think we can help with models of church planting. There's many different ways of doing church planting and what's the most appropriate in any given setting. And sometimes we can help with funding. So I think of a church in North Wales that has received funding from FIEC to plant a church down the road from where they are. And I'd like to see that happen more and more. So I think we can help in those kinds of ways. And there's just another issue really, and it's relatively easy to plant a church not far away from you. It's the kind of strawberry plant model. The kind of mother plant sends out other plants around. But actually, if we were to look at a map of the UK, we would see that strawberry planting is not the only thing we need, because there are huge areas of black holes in the country where there's no spiritual gospel witness. There is no mother plant to send other plants out into it. And I think we've got to find ways of collectively agreeing to work to plant churches where there is no other work. And I think that's a much trickier thing, really. That's where we need a great deal of love and trust in one another and a great deal of commitment to see the gospel going where it doesn't exist at the moment. So I think that's on the church planting front. On the restoring and revitalising front, the reason that's more challenging is because there's already a work there. And the snag is, it is a work that's small and struggling. There's always a reason why works are small and struggling. Sometimes it's a very obvious reason, like there's a dual carriageway that's just been built right through the middle of this parish, and half the people are cut off from it. That will have a massive impact. But the truth is that sometimes churches are small and struggling because they've lost sight of the gospel, or because they don't have any leaders, or because they're not thriving churches as we've been thinking about tonight, and as you are blessed to be. So you've got a whole work of turning something around to face the right direction again, with all the kind of patience that requires. Church planters are impatient, I think. They want everything done yesterday and preferably sooner. And that's great, that's fine. But if you're doing revitalising work, it takes a while to turn the ship around. And that maybe requires a slightly different skill set. But again, we can help in similar kinds of ways. It's a good question there. Thank you.
Does anyone out there have any questions for either Graham or Richard from anything they've been talking about this evening? Paul?
A bit more general question, really standing back from FIEC and standing back from any individual church, but just looking across the evangelical church landscape as you see it in the UK at the moment, can you say what most heartens you and what most concerns you?
Thank you. Well, I think what most heartens me is last weekend. If you had been able to come to the Hub Conference last weekend, and it was the same last year, you would have encountered 150 men and women, mainly young but not exclusively so, who are thinking seriously about giving their lives to gospel work. And I think if you could track back 10 years, 20 years definitely, there was a kind of cry, where are the pastors and leaders of the future? Well, we know the answer to that question now. They were at the Hub Conference. And not just at the Hub, let me say, because FIEC is not the only show in town. I just think that there is a kind of growing awareness in many people's hearts of the need to commit themselves to the work of Jesus in a kind of very troubled land or troubled time. So I'm massively heartened by the growing sense of desire there is to serve. And Keith will know, he's been to the FIC Leaders Conference. There's a growing sense of enthusiasm, I think, a growing sense of togetherness, that this matters, that we can do it together under God. Again, the average age of pastors at that event is falling all the time. I feel positively geriatric. They wouldn't let Graham in anymore. Because they don't have room for Zimmer frames now. Sorry. That wasn't very, tactically, that wasn't very wise, was it?
I thought you said, I want you to help me, Graham.
I did. I'm so sorry. You didn't believe me, did you?
No.
Okay, good. So, sorry, those are really heartening. I think the bits that I think are depressing are when churches lose sight of the gospel. I don't think there are many churches in the kind of FIC world that stop believing it, but functionally we stop believing it. So we still preach it, but we don't expect it to happen, really. We believe God's present, but we don't expect him to do anything. We believe the gospel's the power of God to save people, but we don't think it's going to happen here. And I think that's the bit that makes me most sad. So at one level the gospel is still believed, but functionally it isn't. And that's really sad, because I'm not sure what the future is there. Well, actually I am sure what the future is there. And that happens. Nobody chooses that to happen. It just happens over 101 small decisions, really, to stop taking risks, just to play things safe. Let's just do it the same as we did last year. It's just a sort of mentality that begins to take over. And by the time you've woken up to it, it's too late. I don't know, Graham, because you see thriving churches in your area and ones that aren't quite so thriving?
Yes, I do. I think one of the problems, I was just, as you were speaking, I was thinking of churches that are bound by tradition. But when I come in through these doors tonight, I see there's a building coming up, there's PFS coming on here, and immediately you realise Bethel's on the move. But as I say, I think one of the restricting signs is, well, we've always done it like this. And that's always a sad church to go to, because they're always struggling. And I think, therefore, as I say, it is really necessary to keep focus on what Richard's been saying tonight, that we move on, that we think of the future, and that it's all for the glory of the Lord. And that's what we're about. And that's what our great aim is. That in all this, glory may be brought to our Lord and our Saviour. And tradition binds that and enslaves the gospel in a sense, you know. So, yeah, I think that's to understand. Well, I've talked about the positive sides already coming in tonight, so yeah, it was lovely to come through the doors tonight and see what you're about. And, you know, that's really great.
This is your opportunity, Graham. After that Zimmer frame comment, you can say what you like here. A question for Graham. As a member of a church which has membership of the FIEC, how would you say, as a church, as a ministry, you've either been able to tap into the FIEC or they've helped you in your ministry there in Leamington?
Josh, can I just ask a question associated with that? Can we just have a bit of history? Because how long has your church been established? Because I know it hasn't been established as it is now for as long as we have.
No.
So, you know, it'd be
We're not getting into tradition here, are we?
No, because I know that you did start from house churches.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes,
Yeah?
in actual fact...
So you actually got involved then, yeah.
Yes, we came into we've only been in the FIEC about 5 years, in actual fact. And I've been there 6. I came up from Cornwall, where we've been down there for about 30 years, but in an FIEC church down there as well, as a matter of fact. I can't think what the first question was. This is old age.
How is it, as a fellowship, have you been able to tap into the FIEC, or how have they helped you in the ministry there?
I think one of the great things about the bigger church is that you get a greater vision of what churches together can do. And I always look at it from the point of view of at Emmanuel in Leamington. It's a fairly large church. So what can we do to help the smaller churches in the FIEC? And what can FIEC do to help your pastor as well? And I think that is a great thing. Richard here, well, talked down his role as the pastoral director, but he's a vital man in the FIEC who will support your pastorate, and that's the great thing about FIEC work. Bigger churches supporting the smaller churches, and that's what gives me great joy to go around the churches that I've got at the minute, that I won't say I look after, but I call on, you know, is to encourage the pastors, which is my role really, to bring them up and say, how are you doing? Let's meet for a cup of coffee, etc., etc. Now, to come back to you, yes, Emmanuel started 1980s with a church plant from Rugby Evangelical. And when you go to Rugby Evangelical now, they're saying, oh, how are the Jarvises, how are the so-and-sos? But that's how it started. And the big ministry at Emmanuel at the moment is with students at Warwick University. We run a minibus to pick them up, which is a 16-seater. We have roughly 40-50 students, so you can see that the minibus has a few journeys to make. But we get a great number of students along, and that's a big ministry. Particularly when you think of the fact that a number of the students are from China and abroad, and some of them are converted through the ministry, through the CU. We support the CU in the university. And I mean, I don't know what your links are with Coventry, for instance, you know, but there's going to be an evangelistic outreach with Coventry students shortly, I think, with the CU there, you know. So these are all, you know, great things that, again, with the FIEC support, Bill James, our pastor, is able to move out and help others, you know. I've answered that question, so I don't know whether I...
Can I just add something? I think the thing that's encouraged me enormously is as kind of FIC's got more sorted and got together at the centre and developed a much more coherent and clear vision, it's kind of contagious, really. So you see a whole load of stuff going on locally that's nothing to do with us. But just because people have been to the leaders' conference and caught the vision, they've just gone home and gone on and done it themselves, which is really what you want to see. So I just think that there is a kind of growing awareness. It is very much like Antioch and Jerusalem, a sense of mutual responsibility for one another. Not because we've been told to do or because we've got a policy that says, but because the Holy Spirit's taught us that we do need each other, we do belong together, we are family. And maybe I just think God is doing something, both here in local churches like this and amongst us as a family of churches. So I'm really very heartened to see that. Please don't think it's perfect, because it just isn't, not at any level. It's always better when I talk about it than in reality. But the heart of it is there, and that's the really encouraging thing to see.
Can I also say that the church that I was at in Cornwall, we were... In Cornwall, you feel a bit cut off in any case. Once you're over the Tamar, you know, it's a different country down there. In actual fact, people coming over from Plymouth are called Emmets because they're not part of the Cornish community, you know. But as well as a church, in a sense, we felt very isolated. And what a great joy it was to call on FIEC to help us out with a lot of those everyday practical problems that Richard was talking about, and that will concern, do you have deacons, Keith? Similar thing, yeah. Many meetings where you look at legislation and things like that, and you just, you know, how great to be able to ring up FIEC, you know. So that practical support not only gets you on the right road, but it saves time from the meetings that you've got in the church. All people very busy, got their own day jobs, and that sort of thing. Now there's solicitors up in Market Harbour that will help out. They didn't only help us out with that as well. We had a particular church problem that was brilliantly helped by the then Secretary Bev Savage coming down and helping us there and spending time with us. That's the great thing. So yeah, very beneficial to be a member of the FIEC, certainly. You're not isolated then.
Richard, a slightly wider question, I suppose. What's your take on the on the Bible-believing Christian landscape in this country, are we gaining ground or losing ground, do you think? Because there are a couple of Methodist churches that closed recently around the city. There are one or two of the guys go out preaching at places that there's 7 old ladies and they don't see the need to change, and that sort of thing. And I just wonder if we, as I say, we're gaining ground or losing ground overall.
I think the harsh fact is statistically we're probably standing still. I think, interestingly, this isn't meant to be a politician's answer, but I think we're losing ground and gaining it at the same time. So I think there are a whole collection of smaller churches that are growing smaller, and I think there's a collection of larger churches that are growing larger. I think this weekend is the 25th anniversary of what was South Birmingham Evangelical Church, now called Moneyhull Church. I don't know if any of you come from Birmingham itself, but I think the spiritual climate of Birmingham has changed out of all recognition. There are churches in existence today flourishing that hadn't been heard of 25 years ago. So that's great. But I'm equally sure if you go to Birmingham, you will find churches all over the place that are dying and ageing, shrinking. So I think both of those things are happening at the same time. I think all sorts of interesting things are happening with the mainstream denominations that are basically, I think, dying on their feet, which is not to say that individual churches within them are dying on their feet, but I think the institutions are. Anglicanism is obviously going through traumas of its own. I think what's happened with the kind of charismatic movement is fascinating. So where there was this tremendous amount of energy and enthusiasm back in the 1970s and 80s, I think that has largely dissipated in the sense that the charismatic movement hasn't brought the revival we would all have longed for, even if some of us were slightly sceptical about it. And almost what's happened is that some churches within the movement, if it's possible even to describe it as a movement now, have in a sense come back to the Bible. I've used that phrase rather carelessly, I don't mean to be. Others, I think, are in danger of heading off into kind of open theism. So there's almost a sort of, again, a parting of the ways there. So I just think there's a kind of massive sifting going on, really. And I think the bottom line is all about the gospel. If you are a mainstream denominational church that is committed to the gospel, I think you'll flourish. If you're a charismatic church that's committed to whatever else you do, but getting the gospel out, I think you'll flourish. So I just think there's a kind of sifting. So I think statistically the answer is we're standing still. I think I grew up with the thought that if you were standing still, you were actually going backwards. But I think in the climate we're in today, if we're standing still, that's not bad. But the truth is the population of the country is growing, and church needs to grow just to stand still. So I don't want anything I've said tonight to make us complacent or think this is all great. I think there's lots of it that is great, but boy, is there a lot to do.
And challenges for other faiths as well.
Absolutely. Well, I think in a sense we're moving out of the Christendom world in which Christianity largely was protected and privileged. We're losing our privileges. At the same time, so we're losing on the other side of the coin, as you say, other faith groups are moving in and gaining ground. So I think we're being squeezed all round. There's a militant atheism that there wouldn't have been before. I think of the little working class estate I grew up in. My mum and dad were the only Christians that were there. But everybody knew they were Christians. I think everybody was glad they were Christians. And I think on their better day, most other people probably thought they should have been Christians too. I think if we could go back and relive that today, that would be very different. So,
I guess it's a matter of truth. I was pastor of South Birmingham Evangelical Church.
Ah, were you? Oh, well, happy birthday.
The story will take rather longer than
But it's a good story.
there's a good side to it.
Yeah, right.
there was all kinds of struggle, including one was later on, and there was one fellow who was a millionaire and was spending time with a magistrate.
Okay. I'm not a Sandringham, I guess.
We'll just have one final question because time's moving on. And Chris is waving at me from the back. And then if you have any other burning questions for either Graham or Richard, perhaps you can ask them over a cup of tea and a biscuit a little bit later on. So just one final question from Chris at the back.
Does the FIC conduct any research or support any research to identify the characteristics of the thriving churches that you're talking about in terms of the approach and the sorts of things I'm thinking of, like the research that's done by Lifeway in the States, that kind of thing? So Raymond and
That is a great question, and the simple answer is no, but I had a period in the summer where I just took some time out to just go and read and pray, and I read a book called Resilient Ministry, which was exactly that, in the life of pastors and their families, what enabled pastors to flourish and what kind of brought them low, really. So that's a narrower question than the one you're asking, and certainly I'm just about to embark on a kind of what's called a pastoral wellbeing survey to do just that in the sort of lives of our pastors and their families. But I do think you're asking a really interesting question, and at the Leaders Conference this year we had a very provocative Australian who turned the world upside down for us, as Australians do. And I think he just kind of challenged so many leaders to think hard about leadership. And he would certainly urge us to do exactly what you just said. So yeah, thanks for the reminder. We do need to do that. You quoted the Americans. They're just streets ahead of us all the time when it comes to kind of statistical analysis. We regard that as rather carnal and rather unspiritual, but we're just very silly.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard and Graham. Obviously you didn't grill them too well because they're not sweating, the sweat isn't visibly dripping off them, but thank you for your questions and your answers. And like I said, if you have any other burning questions for them, we have their mobile, no, seriously.
I can tell you where Graham lives.
Yeah, he's closer. If you have any more burning questions for them, by all means ask them. Just after we finish in just a few months over a cup of tea. So thank you very much.
No, thank you.